I think there is a very large potential for this to be an absolute show. But I think that's good. I think it'll be fun and exciting, and it will be an entertaining show. In this video, what I specifically want to focus on is a critical aspect of rain in iRacing, and a critical aspect of why it's a bit absurd to be doing rain and weather in iRacing. Now, first of all, don't get me wrong, I am a huge fan of weather in racing simulators, and I think a big problem with racing simulators, and a big thing that's quite unrealistic about them, is that they're really not dynamic. If you're ever at a real racetrack, you will find that the track is often very different from corner to corner in many ways, or the weather of the day, or the time of the day, or how the sun's heated up the track, and then when you add rain into that, it's a lot less consistent than simulators. You can't really drive a car in real life in the same way that you can in a sim, where you memorize pure Guitar Hero, one set of things, and then execute that and it will work for the next 10 years. You know, you have to have fundamental car handling skills. That's something that a lot of sims kind of have missed out on, and I think that's a sort of holy grail of having more dynamic tracks. Also, me personally, I love the dynamic tracks because it throws a lot of sim races off. So people that have just hot lapped and got really good, it gives me a better advantage over them, so that's great for me. And then also from a sim racing live streaming perspective, the more dynamic and variable things are, the more exciting and interesting the races are as a spectator thing, just as it is in real life. You know, whenever it rains in Formula 1, it's going to be a more interesting race from a raw seeing what happens with the cars. You know, just throw some more variables in there. So I actually really like rain. However, the problem with rain in iRacing, and what I think is a really big issue, is that iRacing seem to have done a really nice advanced weather system. It looks like they've genuinely really approached this from a you know, different road surfaces, different angle of the road, different locations, different concrete textures, different how the curbing works, everything. They've approached rain properly from a simulation thing of, it's not just track gets a bit slippier and then it gets less slippier, or there's a defined racing line. They've properly approached this. The problem is iRacing doesn't yet have realistic tyres in the dry in optimal conditions. So I would argue that a simulator should not bother doing more advanced rain, dirt, God knows what happening with the road surface, until they have absolutely nailed dry handling. Now, some of you might not know this. You might not know iRacing, or you might be some weird iRacing fanboy that's either never been in a real car on slick tyres, or just have never watched videos of real cars, or just don't know many people that do real world race driving that will point this out very quickly. In iRacing, the moment you go onto and slightly over the limit, the tyres, basically the contact patch of them starts heating up very quickly. It gets to a point where it basically overheats, and then the car just loses it. When you're turning into a corner, if you turn too much and the back starts sliding out, there's not really anything you can do to mitigate that slide. You can initially snap it and it might come back, but generally speaking, it will just get stuck over the limit and the car will just keep going. If you get on the brakes, it will keep going. If you turn, it will keep going. The one option you have in iRacing is to stamp on the brake and the accelerator. And to be fair, that is a way of saving the car. You've seen Max Verstappen do it in Formula 1 at Interlagos a few years back. But it's not really the normal way that you would just catch a basic slide. If you really want to see a good example of how one would drive a real car versus how one drives in iRacing, you can watch iRacing's official SR10 comparison video, where the driver of the real car is approaching that exactly as you would drive a real car, and the iRacing driver is approaching it exactly how you drive iRacing. So given that you can basically only effectively do sort of power slides into iRacing, you can only turn into the corner, unwind a little bit, and then drive off, and you can't actually balance and counter steer the car and catch it on the limit properly in iRacing in perfect conditions with optimal tyres, one has to wonder how that is going to operate when you then introduce a more dynamic track that's going to cause situations where you're likely to be going over the limit much more often, or you're going to have to be tested the limit. You'll see in real life, you can turn the wheel and you can sort of force the car onto the limit a little bit just to feel where that limit is, and then just bring it back, and you can keep testing the grip. You don't do that in iRacing. It'll cause you to understeer massively, and the car will either ignore it entirely or it'll just be sloppy. But that's a perfectly normal thing to do in reality. So I just wonder how the rain is supposed to work with this current tyre model, and why that they've done this really advanced weather system before getting the handling in iRacing up to the level of, say, even in many ways it's worse than rFactor 1, a sim that's older than iRacing, worse than Live for Speed, a sim that I think is a few years older than iRacing, massively worse than Assetto Corsa, massively worse than rFactor 2. Just in the base handling. Don't get me wrong, all those simulators have physics issues as well, so it's not that any sim is perfect. They all have problems, but those sims I've just listed don't have as big of a binary, absolute defined fail condition that means that you literally cannot drive them like actual cars. I think iRacers they've been brainwashed into thinking that it's fine. It really isn't. So I'm not quite sure how the rain will operate within that context of iRacing's physics, unless they have actually addressed with this update, or when this update comes out, if they fully addressed the dry handling as well, and you'll be able to sort of small slide drift, counter steer properly, power into corners properly. I would imagine, and this is one thing I noticed with iRacing, is that when the track is colder in certain scenarios, or if you're on the grass, for example, especially when they were testing out the different grass grip levels, if the tyres are actually being forced to stay cold, they actually operate a lot more like real-world tyres, because they don't get into that surface overheating state, which I believe is the actual issue. So maybe the wet track will actually allow for you to it'll be less of a problem, because it will cool the tyres down, magically mitigating the bulk of what causes the current issue. It's going to be really interesting, though, needless to say. I would hope that they fundamentally change the actual tyre model in the dry, and then the wet will work. Maybe they'll be completely separated. Who knows? It's going to be really, really interesting. Now, one thing that they've put out on their development blog is they've said here, the Tempest system delivers an experience unlike anything else in simulation racing, and it may take some time for iRacers to properly acclimatise to the feature. What it will do, definitely, if iRacing have actually made their tyre model realistic, it will literally require you to drive iRacing totally differently. If you play AC, rFactor 2, other racing sims, you have to completely drive utterly differently to play iRacing, just to be within like a second and a half of the pace in the top split. You have to approach iRacing totally differently. So if they actually have made the tyres realistic, this is going to absolutely blow iRacers' minds, and maybe not in a positive way. It does seem from the post and from what they've said that, as I said before, that they are trying to do as genuine, deep simulation of wet weather as possible. Not just the track getting a little bit less grippy, not just a fixed drying line. In fairness to other simulators, some of them do actually have a relatively complex weather system. It's not that they do have an overly simplistic weather system. This seems a bit like a diss from iRacing. We can't know until you actually try it and see how it operates, how it will pan out. One thing I have noticed actually with simulators that do have more dynamic drying lines or more dynamic weather systems, dynamic puddle systems and things, what you tend to find is that they can be as dynamic as they want. The track is going to get wet in a fairly similar way every single time. People are going to drive the track in a fairly similar way most times, and so despite it being dynamic, the end results end up being not that dynamic. So we'll have to see how it pans out. Racing in the rain can be counterintuitive at first, and successfully navigating a wet race will involve unlearning habits you might have learnt in the dry. It would be nice if they defined how. I mean, the things that are normally counterintuitive with wet weather driving is that the racing line can be more slippy at times. If you're using wet tyres, a lot of people don't realise this. Wet tyres can actually offer more bite, or they're more progressive in grip loss and can be driven harder sometimes than dry tyres. There's different tyre temperature management aspects with wet tyres, and then also there's the transition point between the track getting wet and dry. So there's a lot of nuance. I agree it is probably counterintuitive in many ways, but not really that counterintuitive, and nowhere near as counterintuitive as the basic driving in iRacing. So we'll have to see. As rain begins to cover the surface, the areas of the track that still have rough asperities are able to better accommodate the water, because it will first settle in those low valleys before it becomes a slippery film. So that's good. That sort of alludes to the complexity of the road surface affecting the rain, which is cool. The slippery film on the surface is what can cause the tyre to lose purchase and hydroplane. However, the worn down high traffic racing line will have had its asperities worn down, and there's less room for the water to hide from the surface of the tyre. The end result is that the typical racing line becomes slicker sooner than the rest of the racetrack, and racers need to seek areas offline to find. There you go. So yeah, no, it looks like they're doing proper. You know, they've gone into doing rain on the track and how that operates in a realistic way, which is good. I mean, it's a simulator. That's what they're supposed to be doing. That's what they aim for, and I think it will make things more exciting. So with the release of the rain, we recommend iRacers first dip their toe into a test session. Great, yeah, they're basically just saying that you're going to need to, you want to practice it, all that stuff. I don't need to read that out. They've got a really cool weather radar. They also allude to in this that they're going to use like historical rain data for the various tracks. So basically every single race at Brands Hatch will be in the wet. You also will have to eat some fish and chips before doing the race, and then you'll have to go home and watch BBC Parliament and cry yourself to sleep. Otherwise it's unrealistic. Yeah, you know, as I say, you guys can read through all of this. I do think visually and graphically what they've shown of the rain looks really quite interesting. The big question will be how those visuals and graphics actually affect the performance of the simulator, especially for those of you that are playing in virtual reality. All that will need to be tested out. I really do hope that iRacing have really optimized the graphics of the rain, and I really hope that they've done it quite consistently, because one of the big problems of iRacing historically has been that the different tracks and the different vehicles and the size of the grids massively affects the frame rate in a very inconsistent way. So for example, you'd set your frame rate up for one track and one location, you'd be like, oh, it's great, I'm hitting 120 FPS, it's totally smooth, no issues, all race. And then you go to another track and it's like, oh, now I'm getting stutter and it's really unplayable. Or you go from a 20 car one type of car 20 car race to another type of car 20 car race, and again, now my settings don't work well because this car happened to have a lot more level of detail to it, due to it maybe being a newer car or just optimized differently. So I really hope the rain, they optimize it cleverly. I wouldn't expect they will do. I'm sure it will get better over time. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? But yeah, all told, I do, as I say, I'm actually pro rain myself. I really do like rain in simulators. I find it more entertaining and it's better. I get better race results. For most people though, they can't drive 10 laps, let alone 5 laps in perfect conditions, especially with iRacing and its current tyre model that overly punishes any form of overdriving. Basically doesn't allow you to actually countersteer properly, as I say. So iRacing doesn't function properly in absolute mint perfect conditions, and iRacers themselves struggle with absolute mint perfect conditions, largely due to technical issues with the simulator. So I'm really not quite sure how this is going to be good for most iRacers and for online racing on the service for most people. And then yeah, we're going to see how it actually interacts, how the tyre strategy stuff operates. I think there is a very large potential for this to be an absolute show. But I think that's good. I think it'll be fun and exciting, and it will be an entertaining show. So that's all that really matters. And I do really I appreciate the work that developers put into simulators, and I appreciate that iRacing I'll keep pushing things forwards. They might be a bit slow at it. They might not have worked out the basic tyre model. But in terms of anything separate to the actual car handling and driving, the online, the events, the features they add to it, the ease of use and accessibility, and the allowing for people to have Smurf accounts that completely invalidates how an ELO system operates. I really appreciate all those aspects of iRacing that go to make it one of the most, well, it is the most entertaining racing simulator. So With that said, let me know in the comments what you think about iRacing's new reign and their big update, and if you will be getting onto iRacing to try it out. We will be getting onto it to try it out when it does actually drop. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens. It's good, like it's all good. So thank you for watching this video though, guys. Hopefully I'll see you soon in our next live stream. If you haven't, you can still dingle that like button, and you can type in the comments section, "Dear God, what have I done with the time of my life watching this terrible channel? I hate you, Gamer Muscle." That's a lot for you to type, but there you go. Until the next one, guys. Thanks for watching. Happy tea drinking. Take care and goodbye.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Slow, man. Slow.